I came into this drama enamored of Laura and found myself both fascinated and repelled by the Jerry Springer Show level of trailer trash spirituality and cultic manipulation she displayed. Hey, you all, welcome back to the channel. My name's Todd, and I'm the Confused Wanderer. And today I just want to go over and read this article. Just wanted to let you know Bryce isn't going to be here today. She's preparing for her big interview for a documentary being filmed tomorrow. She's just going over all her notes and just focusing on that. So it's just me. And this should be a fairly short one. I just want to keep the momentum going, get this information out as quickly and as consistently as I can. So here we go. This article, which is my favorite article that's been written about this whole Cassiopaean cult scandal by Rollo Tomasi. Rollo Tomasi is a film critic, author, and social revolutionary. He chooses to remain anonymous for obvious reasons. Part 1, The Forbidden Planet of Ouija Love. New Age channeling, similar to but significantly different from the Old Age mediumship, was all the rage in the metaphysical 90s of the last century. There was Ramtha and Lazarus, Joseph and Saint Germain, not to mention such classics, Space Brother transmissions as those of the Alterians, the Ashar Command, and of course the Palladians. But as the world lurched unsteadily into the New World Order's new age of unremitting war on terrorism, these quaint pronouncements of galactic goodwill and cosmic aspirations faded like photos of the last metaphysical decade at the turn of the 19th century. Even Shirley MacLaine, Hollywood's queen of the new age, has moved on to more traditional forms of spirituality, as demonstrated by her last book, The Camino, about walking the ancient pilgrim track in southern France. Yet the new age has one last superstar, one last message from the beyond that, in its own bizarre way, punctuates the earlier blather of the bliss ninnies. To the connoisseur of such arcane matters, the new message from the Cassiopeans has all the hallmarks of greatness. Who could resist a new age doomsday message with such a potent mixture of sex, lies, and Ouija boards? The Cassiopean message is very simple. Be afraid. Be very afraid. The Cassiopean view of reality is one in which government mind control plots go hand in hand with evil and selfish reptoid aliens from the future who ape and abduct at will among the complacent population. There is no protection or salvation save in the knowledge bestowed by the Cassiopeans. This is, in fact, one of their favorite slogans. Knowledge protects, ignorance endangers. Never mind the knowledge without the wisdom to understand or use it is about the most useless thing in the universe. The Cassiopeans claim that it is enough to know the truth as revealed by them, of course. Their truth, however, is deeply suspect, and not just on philosophical grounds. From galactic depictions of ape by 4D lizard beings to discussions of circumcision and its after effects, all the way to tantric innuendos and speculation on Jesus's sex life and that of his descendant, according to the Cassiopeans, Yasser Arafat. The polymorphously perverse world of the Cassiopeans is a marvel to behold. If we may speculate, along with Jungian psychologist James Hillman, that the contents of such channeling represents the depth of archetypal trauma in the channeler's life, then we may rightly conclude that wherever this stuff originated, whatever rock and whoever's subconscious it crawled out from under, that entity was one seriously disturbed individual. And we haven't even begun to scratch the surface yet. Mix those potent SEX-UAL metaphors in a broth of end-of-the-world hysteria. Add a dash of pure Nazi Aryan racial theory, a pinch of essence of anti-Semitism, a strong dollop of bad science fiction, and fold carefully into pseudo-rational physics and mathematical jargon, being very sure you understand nothing about them, of course, and then flavor to taste with the conspiracy du jour, and voila, out comes the Cassiopean message. So just who are the Cassiopeans? According to their website, which, if we are to believe the hit counter, is very popular and growing more so daily, they are a collective entity, not unlike a nescient Borg hive who transmit through the constellation Cassiopeia, that irregular W in the northern sky. This intriguing constellation was once known as the Throne of Set, the ancient Egyptian god of chaos, disruption, and evil. And even in the Greek version by which it is known today, the myth of Cassiopeia, a mother who sacrifices her daughter to the great lizard sea serpent, takes us into dark mythological waters. These clues alone should be enough to warn those sensitive to symbology. Here be monsters from the id. But the Cassiopeans are not the Krell, and Laura Knight Martin Yaddick, the official Cassiopean mouthpiece, is no Dr. Morpheus. Think rather the idiot who was possessed and whose demon, my name is Legion, was cast into the Gandarian swine by Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. Demons, monsters from the id, or game playing 6D aliens who are us in the future. These are all symptomatic of a deeply rooted pathological condition, one that, if described in detail to a psychiatrist, would result in commitment proceedings. However, if transformed into channeled material and properly packaged, this pathology can make one famous and perhaps even wealthy. At the very least, it could provide the cottage industry basics for survival outside the pressures of society. Oh, so Miss Knight Yaddick has always hoped. Laura, we will call her Laura because it humanizes her, and we will need all of that we can manage as the tale goes along, has never been shy about telling her story. At over 1.5 million words, the word count of her 2-volume autobiography approaches the verbiage of the complete works of Balzac. To give the reader some idea of this incredible degree of inflated self-importance and combined word count of the most extensive biographies of the 3 most prominent men in 20th century, Gandhi, Einstein, and Hitler, weigh in at barely 3/4 of Laura's total. We can only wonder what she has done, even in her own fantasy, to rate more words than those 3. When we take the pains, and it is indeed painful, to wade through the thickets of purple prose in impassioned self-justification and read these tomes, we find that Laura was a disturbed child with a dysfunctional home life, such as a kidnapping by her stepfather at age 4, unaliving attempts, and other self-destructive behavior, who grew into a disturbed adult, plagued by hypochondria and often unsure exactly who fathered each of her 5 children, and who in the end divorced her first husband because she believed he was a reptoid zombie. We fortunately don't have to take Laura's word for all of this. Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Tom French followed her around on and off for several years and published his account as The Exorcist in Love in the Sunday, February 13th issue of St. Petersburg Times. While the article is somewhat sanitized at Laura's insistence, it does cover all the major points with one important exception. We will come to that in due course. From Tom French's article, we also learn the details of how the messages from the Cassiopeans were delivered. Unlike most New Age channeling, the Cassiopeans preferred a method that is as old as modern spiritualism, the Ouija board. This is a large slick surface board with letters and symbols placed in a circle around the edge. A question is asked, and a small plastic or glass pointer called a planchette spells out the letters of the answer. Originally called the Spirit Board, it gained a mass audience in the first channeling craze 150 years ago. Queen Victoria was rumored to use one when her Scots Gilly and medium was unavailable to chat with long-departed Prince Albert and to speculate on the true identity of the Whitechapel murderer. Those students of the occult arts who claim to know of such things dismiss the Ouija board as the lowest form of astral communication, good only for talking with the shells of the dead and the most earthbound of astral entities. Without allowing for actual spirits, We might say the Ouija board, as with automatic writing and active imagination, allows one to come into direct contact with the depth contents of the collective unconscious. The Cassiopeans, however, seem to prefer this method of contact. From Tom French's description of a session at the board, we find that in addition to Laura, another person's hands or fingers were always on the planchette as it spelled out the letters. Although Laura seems willing to go to great lengths to deny the other person's fingers on the planchette had any effect at all, it is obvious that this intrapersonal connection exerted enormous influence on the outcome. The other person was Fredric Irland, her friend and confidant at that period. Fred, as we will call him, seems by all accounts, including Laura's and the Cassiopeans themselves, to have been the key, the catalyst through which the channeled message emerged. Even though Laura has attempted several times to retroactively make Fred's presence on the Ouija board completely disappear, the very amount of verbiage she has expelled on the subject is enough to alert us to his importance in her life. Fred's role in the Cassiopean saga must be taken into consideration. By Laura's account, Fred is an androgynous being struggling to come to terms with his sexuality and riddled with interpersonal problems to the point he is completely incapacitated. He is painted as such a jerk and screw up that one's immediate reaction is, if Fred was so bad, why keep him around? Unless, of course, his participation was key, if not central, to the communicating with the Cassiopeans. And here we find Laura impaled on the first of many catch-22s to come. Because Fred is a private person not given to flights of grandiosity or driven by self-justification, we have little but Laura's endless and patently distorted version of events by which to gauge him. Of course, not a hint of these problems can be found in Tom French's article. Those who know him or even exchange emails with him discover a vastly different person from the Frank so viciously portrayed in Laura's autobiography. This discovery is so jarring that one is immediately wary of any of Laura's subsequent conclusions. The question arises, if she could defame one of her closest friends and the person most responsible for the Cassiopean transmissions, then what would she do with someone who truly disagreed with her? Fred's crime was apparently leaving Laura without permission, and of course, without a connection to the Cassiopeans. In Laura's eyes, this was completely without precedent, unheard of, and something she could not stand for. When she found that Fred was simply not coming back, then the increasingly vicious attacks began. Hell hath no fury, as the old saying goes, like that of a woman scorned. But always in the Cassiopean soap opera, the SEX-UAL issues are deeper and more convoluted than appear on the surface. You see, the Cassiopeans had already supplied Laura with the love of her life, performing a couple of genuine miracles in the bargain, long before Fred decided to leave. The story, extracted from The Exorcist in Love in Volume 2 of Laura's autobiography, goes something like this. After a few years of channeling the Cassiopeans, Laura suddenly realizes that her husband has been abducted by the reptoids and replaced with a zombie replica designed to monitor and interfere with her activities. She divorces him, goes into a deep depression from which she is miraculously saved by the Cassiopeans. Never in the annals of parapsychology and the history of communication with astral entities has there been such a bizarre three-way relationship as that between Laura, the Cassiopeans, and her long-lost love from another lifetime. Directed by a synchronistic comment from the Cassiopeans, she connects via email with a Polish physicist by the name of Dr. Arkadiusz Yadek. Impressed, Laura immediately began to weave a fantasy about karmic lost love, lovers separated by the Holocaust and restored by the good graces of disincarnate beings from sixth density. Beguiled by 20-year-old photos, love letters, and her romantic fantasy, Dr. Ark allows himself to be seduced. Of course, like any good love story, there are obstacles. Dr. Ark is married and stuck in a dead-end teaching job at a second-rate Polish university with little hope of even traveling to the States, much less moving there. But those rascally Cassiopeans were insistent. And amazingly enough, a series of very strange events led directly to Dr. Ark's arrival in February 1997. These strange events, as chronicled in Adventures with the Cassiopeans, Volume 2 of Laura's autobiography, include a quick visit to the Central European University in Budapest, a George Soros front organization for the political development of the former Soviet satellites, in an astounding about-face concerning his status at the University of Wroclaw, along with the offer of a job connected to the University of Florida at Gainesville. To the casual observer, this suggests that perhaps the Cassiopeans have a few political connections, or that someone who had those connections had become very interested in the Cassiopeans. Dr. Ark finally arrived, however. He spent a few days visiting, sat in on a few Ouija board sessions, the transcripts of which show him as completely unimpressed, if not hostile, and then he left, apparently with no desire or intention to return. But those wily Cassiopeans knew better, and they were right. Dr. Ark returned to Poland to find that someone had alerted his wife to his affair, sending her reams of private emails exchanged between him and Laura. The same person had also spammed his university with tales of his cultic involvement. His wife divorced him, taking all his assets and giving them to the church, and his university simply cut him loose. By the summer of 1997, all of his bridges burned for him. Dr. Ark had no choice but to return to Laura. The Cassiopeans were right all along. It was a true miracle, and the lovers were reunited. Except, logically, the only person who could have sent Dr. Ark's wife those private emails was Laura. By doing so, she made sure the Cassiopeans' prophecy became self-fulfilling. Perhaps at the time, Dr. Ark didn't think that part through carefully enough. Perhaps Laura and the Cassiopeans convinced him that it was some intelligence agency tapping his emails. Who knows? In hindsight, however, and when years of Laura's erratic behavior exposed for all to see, it is possible to define a pattern. We will find her using the exact same tactics later against Fred, Vincent, and other members of the Rebel Alliance when she feels under attack. With Dr. Ark's permanent return, things began to change on the Cassiopean front, and Laura began a campaign to get noticed on the internet. The Cassiopean website, for a while, resided on the University of Wroclaw's server, began to grow in depth and complexity. By the time Tom French's article appeared in February 2000, the future of Cassiopeia, the C's, as the growing group of admirers call them, seemed assured. In fact, the very positive tone of Tom French's article helped establish Laura and the C's as a force to be reckoned with in New Age circles. Laura, however, did not feel the article was positive enough and wrote her own article debunking and deriding it. Naturally, her version was almost twice as long as the original. It took almost a year before Laura decided that the St. Pete Times article was the biggest thing that had ever happened to her. By then, of course, the Cassiopeans' message had become the dogma of a new and potentially dangerous doomsday cult, one that in its essential worldview was hardly indistinguishable from that of Heaven's Gate or the Solar Temple. How this occurred forms the second portion of my story. Part 2, the Ouija Matrix, or the spy who didn't shag Laura. I stumbled onto the Cassiopeans by accident, but in a manner that I would later find entirely appropriate for the situation. As a film critic and freelance social gadfly, it's my job to explore the intersection of psyche and pop culture. One of the truly fascinating developments of the last few years has been the acceptance of The Matrix, a good special effects science fiction action film marred by, in my opinion, a profound lack of depth by fringe UFO and conspiracy groups as the literal truth about our reality. Some of The Matrix's ideas can be found in the early Matrix volumes produced by the intriguingly named Val Valerian. But it was only after the movie became a hit that its symbolic resonance became a part of the mainstream New Age movement. I found this entertaining at first, but as more references began popping up in all sorts of strange places, I found myself contemplating what the New Agers like to call a paradigm shift. The importance of the Matrix appeared to be as a species of text for a new kind of Gnostic or Manichaean dualism, one that sees resistance to the imagined matrix as the source of all positive action. For the Lotus Eaters and Bliss Ninnies in the Space Brothers camp, this was a radical notion indeed. And so, late last year, I decided that I'd write an article on this curious development. I went surfing through the strangeness available on the internet, and one fine day the wave landed me at the Cassiopeia.org. At first glance, it appeared to be the mother lode. Not only was The Matrix one of Laura's favorite movies, but also the worldview and orientation of the Cassiopeans seemed to anticipate some of the core elements in what I was calling the Matrix mythos. She apparently didn't use the term until after the film, but there was no doubt about the priority of her concepts. Highly intrigued, I downloaded and printed out hundreds of pages of The Wave, Amazing Grace, and more oddly titled articles than I could imagine. I read The Exorcist in Love and waded into the posted transcripts. As I read, the idea of an article on the Matrix faded. I was hooked on the pure stuff, the inside poop from the Cassiopeans themselves. I joined one of the Cassiopean discussion groups, looking for more information, and was totally disappointed by the level of intellectual discourse. Laura never posted, and Dr. Ark's comments were those of a hall monitor struggling with a group of unruly third graders. I was contemplating moving on to the next level of their e-groups, since the one I was in was apparently only for those who couldn't be trusted of the main group. However, before I reached that point, something happened that changed my whole point of view. Dr. Ark called a flame war. Now, flame wars are common in cyberspace, and I admit I have participated in my share, but this one was different right from the start. Dr. Ark was refusing to answer questions from someone called Elvis Baggins. The questions concerned their treatment of and involvement with someone named Vincent Bridges. Eventually, Dr. Ark called in reinforcements from within the group and even invited the opposition from another discussion group to come and watch the fight. The end result was that Dr. Ark blinked and completely refused to answer even one of the questions put to him. I found this all quite fascinating, especially as I had somehow missed the pages about Vincent Bridges in his alleged attempts to destroy the Cassiopean material. I looked them up, read them, and found myself with even more questions on top of the unanswered ones put to Dr. Ark by Bridges and Baggins. Nothing about the whole affair made any sense. By Laura's account, Vincent Bridges was a two-bit con man playing on new age sensibilities to provide him with expensive cars, black clothes, stereo equipment, and designer drugs. She also depicted him as a hack writer who had no credits to speak of and needed to inflate his resume by claiming works that didn't exist. This episode today is brought to you by Fusion Body Studio. If you're watching this show today, you're obviously into spirituality. But if you're not exercising, you're not on the right path, because spirituality starts in the body. Fusion Body Studio is female owned and operated. And at Fusion Body Studio, they take all the traditional teachings of the East and merge it into modern day exercises. Right now, Fusion Body Studio is running a special. If you use promo code AYA20, you'll get 20% off your first 6 months at Fusion Body Studio. With tuition already cheap, this is a deal you can't pass up. All information is in the description box below. The holes in her deception were glaring, and her expose didn't seem to have any real bite to it. I wondered why she was even bothering with such an inconsequential individual. So I did a web search on Vincent Bridges and discovered literally hundreds of citations and scores of articles under his name by line. He was the co-author of a well-respected book on alchemy, A Monument to the End of Time, Alchemy, Fulcanelli, and the Great Cross, and a bizarre little work on communicating with the ghost of Sally Hemings, Thomas Jefferson's Black Mistress, Interlude with Sally Hemings, Diary of a Spiritual Healing. His work was well represented on other websites, including Shangri-La.com, Diagnosis.com, Rinse.com, and many others. His unpublished book-length works available on the internet include The Gnostic Science of Alchemy, The UFO Enigma, Spirits of the Dead, Phantom Airships and Flying Discs, The Apocalyptic Secrets of René's Le Chateau, Author, and the Fall of Britain, High Weirdness, and others. In addition, his articles included Innocent Murder, the real story of John Monet's death, which was described by former Boulder police detective Steve Thomas on the Larry King Live show as the best article and the most likely solution ever published on the JBR case. The Google search also revealed that he was the author of Death of the Feminine, the 1997 article about the death of Princess Diana, that for more than a year was a major link on every Diana-oriented site. The cap was an already intense melange of weirdness. I learned that Vincent Bridges was also a collaborator with Dan Winter, a person concerning whom I had heard quite a bit. Mr. Winter, now apparently an international fugitive from a copyright infringement suit, was the role model for the central figure in Darren Aronofsky's PI. In fact, the inside buzz was that the entire movie was modeled on Dan Winter's dispute with Stan Tenen of the Merleau Foundation. And Vincent Bridges had apparently been Dan Winter's publisher at the time. From the remaining articles of Mr. Winters on the web, it appears that he had appropriated as much from Vincent Bridges' work as he had from Stanley Tenen's. And there was more. Vincent Bridges was also apparently a well-known and widely respected dowser and earth grid engineer, as well as a pagan political activist and world traveler, leading tour groups to southern France, Egypt, and India. He had produced his own translation of the I Ching. His Egyptology work was quoted by scholars as diverse as John Major Jenkins, John West, Daniel Colonius, and Robert Temple. He had helped found 3 schools or educational organizations: the Fifth Way Mystery School, the Newport Earth Institute in Newport, New Hampshire, and Pendragon College. No matter how you slice it, the person I discovered on the internet bore little resemblance to the person portrayed in the Cassiopaean expose. Vincent Bridges was anything but a hack that needed to claim non-existent work in order to have a resume. And that I found extremely curious and disturbing. After the flame war died down, I tried to ask a few questions myself. I was first warned, then unceremoniously booted from the group. So I joined the opposition's discussion group. There I found a community of ex-Cassiopeanists who were not only willing to talk, but anxious to do so. And I found the elusive Vincent Bridges and discovered that he would courteously answer any questions I asked him, thoroughly and in great detail. This is so different than what I had experienced on the Cassiopean e-group that I was quite frankly charmed. I settled in to observe developments, and my Matrix article began to gel into the article you are now reading. And developments were not long in coming. Fred reappeared and asserted his right to be considered as a co-author of the Cassiopean material by publishing the raw, unedited versions of the transcripts. These were a real eye-opener, revealing that Laura was selectively changing certain comments and predictions of the Cassiopeans to make them more accurate in the published versions. There were also embarrassingly long sections pleading for financial advice, pick 3 lotto numbers, and endless demands for a way to make the experiment pay for itself. In short, the unedited transcripts showed the world a mean-spirited, vindictive, and money-hungry Laura. It is no surprise that she took violent offense at these revelations. They permanently tarnished her self-proclaimed sainthood. But another incident along the way revealed an unexpected aspect of Laura's past, one that even Tom French chose, for his own reasons, not to mention. Laura announced, as some kind of preemptive strike against what she felt was impending revelations by what she now referred to as the Bridges Irland gang, that she had indeed been arrested and tried for attempted unaliving back in 1970 when she was just 18 years old. The only problem was that the gang had said not a word about any of it. This was undoubtedly the defining moment, the hidden skeleton and secret shame of Laura's life. By trotting it out preemptively, she turned it into a bid for sympathy. However, since Amazing Grace, Volume 1 of her autobiography, covered those years in exhaustive and almost narcissistic detail without even a glimmer of a mention of the incident, the sympathy soon turned into realization. How can anyone ignore so completely such a pivotal incident in their life? If they did, how could anything else in their life story be trusted at face value? For the first time, Laura's pathology began to show. Vincent put up his own website, vincentbridges.com, with an open discussion board and a banner ad for the unedited transcripts, free to all for the time it took to download them. His co-author on A Monument to the End of Time joined the Cassiopaeans in attacking his credibility, and apparently even attempted to take over Vincent's book company. The flame war erupted intermittently on Vincent's discussion board as Laura launched into an incredible feat of typing and endurance. In just 7 weeks, she published on the site over 700,000 words of the second volume of her autobiography, Adventures with the Cassiopeans. As this latest unfinished tome emerged from computer keyboard, other skirmishes were taking place. But the more Laura wrote about Fred and Vincent, the more deranged she became. Chapters were spent comparing Fred to John Nash of a Beautiful Mind, and Vincent to counterculture trunk unaliver Ira Inhorn. My personal favorite was the chapter-long attack on Egyptology and Egyptologists that was clearly aimed directly at Vincent and his work on Egyptian history and religion. Hard to imagine in what reality hieroglyphic envy could be such a powerful motivating force, but that is apparently the case in the Cassiopean universe. Finally, in the last few weeks, the conflict has sputtered into an inconclusive stalemate. Fred signed away his rights to the Cassiopean material for a return to his previously pseudomonous state, and Vincent, in an attempt to reach an agreement, took down the articles and discussion board at vincentbridges.com. The Cassiopeanists, however, not relented, and taking heart from their apparent victories, have redoubled their efforts. A new version of the expose has appeared. Curiously enough, there is no new information, but a basic reworking of the original material. Vincent's co-author, Jay Widener, retraced his open letters attacking Vincent, and Laura seized upon that as an excuse to attack Mr. Widener. Other than that, it is still full of the same old lies and distorted half-truths. This is curious, since on the Matryoshka discussion group, a highly recommended source for anyone wishing to explore this subject further, can be found an email from one W.E. McKenzie describing his failed attempt to correct some of the inaccuracies in their expose. From this example, we can't help but wonder what else they have chosen to delete or ignore, particularly when we find not one mention of Vincent's easily obtainable credits and accomplishments listed above. I came into this drama enamored of Laura and found myself both fascinated and repelled by the Jerry Springer Show level of trailer trash spirituality and cultic manipulation she displayed. I am now glad that I had as little contact with the Cassiopeanists as I did. I suppose I am one of the lucky ones, but I have spent almost 6 months now following this soap opera, and I have come to some conclusions on how a fairly harmless channeling hobby for 2 or 3 if you count Dr. Ark, became an apocalyptic doomsday cult. It wasn't Dr. Ark's arrival. It wasn't Dr. Ark's arrival, the internet, or even Tom French's article that crystallized a cult out of this Matrix mythos. Nope. The blame, if such we may call it, rests squarely on Vincent Bridges. Vincent's own reputation lent an air of credibility to Laura's ramblings. His influence is obvious from the spring of 1999 when Laura first contacted him, through December of 2000 when Laura announced in The Wave that Vincent understood some of the Cassiopaeans' cryptic comments better than anyone else, including her. By February of 2001, Vincent was completely involved to the point of making Laura and Dr. Ark the featured speakers at his fall conference. Other speakers included Moria Timms, author of Beyond Prophecy and Predictions, John Major Jenkins, author of The Tolkien and Maya Cosmologies, 2012, J.M. Allen, author of Atlantis, The Andes Solution, as well as Vincent and Jay. It was indeed high praise to be given the keynote spot in such company. Vincent also offered to help them get their books into print through his own small publishing company, Etheria Books. Much has been made about whether or when this company actually existed and whether it was an LLC or something else, since court documents relating to Vincent's involvement with Dan Winter clearly mention Etheria Books years before Laura entered the picture, and by her own account, money was collected and deposited and even refunded for the canceled conference, all of which requires a bank account and a tax number. Then we must conclude that some kind of company known as Etheria Books certainly did exist. Amazon.com apparently still thinks so. By giving them this much credibility, Vincent unleashed a monster. For the first time ever, Laura saw that the elusive fame and fortune that she had begged the Cassiopeans to provide was about to materialize. There was only one small cloud on the horizon, Vincent Bridges himself. He was just too smart, too accomplished, too skilled of a researcher, and too good a writer, and far too well connected. If Laura let him stay in the group, she risked being seriously overshadowed. Vincent might actually solve some of the enigmas the Cassiopeans were so fond of. And where would she be then? I'm sure that to her it felt like a life or death situation. Fortunately, as so often in the past, the Cassiopeans came to the rescue. Following a now familiar pattern, the Cassiopeans revealed to Laura that Vincent was an evil black magician and or a government agent, and that she should have nothing further to do with him. He's lucky he wasn't labeled a rectoid zombie like husband number one. The behind-the-scenes machinations took a month, and at the end of that time, the conference was in shambles. The proposed book deal was off, and Vincent was well on his way to becoming the ultimate evil nemesis of the Cassiopeanists. It was this last and most crucial ingredient that allowed the Cassiopeanists to close ranks in the face of the imagined threat and become the cult that Laura had always dreamed of controlling. Vincent played into this by first remaining silent, and then, when they had already gutted his credibility, attacking Laura's sanity and reputation. Too little, too late, and he never did mount an effective response to their charges. Laura accuses him basically of resume fraud, and yet, out of perhaps some antique and a misguided sense of ethics, Vincent never mentioned her own inflated resume. On the Perseus Foundation biography page, one finds the following: Laura Knight, CHT, 26 years experience in hypnotherapy. Assuming, of course, the CHT stands for Certified Hypnotherapist instead of Chief Terrorist. We might wonder at the section of adventures where she openly admits that she has no training or certification whatsoever in hypnosis or therapy. Her only credential is a membership in a no longer existing professional organization, one that was open to anyone interested in the subject and willing to pay the dues. As for 26 years of experience, that would imply she started doing hypnosis in 1976, whereas in Amazing Grace, we learn that her hypnosis career began in early 1990s. These are lies, by her own admission. Prominently posted on the same foundation website were Vincent is flayed for making a mistake in a blurb used by a radio show that went off the air in 1999. And so the whole sad and sordid saga down to sex, lies, and Ouija boards. Laura's action towards both Fred and Vincent suggest the emotional involvement of a jilted lover, as Laura's choice of a new pseudonym for Vincent, Dr. Evil, reminds us Laura saw Vincent as the spy who refused to shag her in true Austin Powers fashion. Hell again hath no fury, and so on. The lies are obvious. Laura's whole fictional account of her life is one big tissue of lies, as the carefully repressed and concealed attempted unaliving charge demonstrates. She has lied about Fred, and she has gone out of her way to squeeze out lies about Vincent. I'm sure she lies to herself, her children, and even Dr. Ark when required. Why stop a good thing when it is working so well? However, I do believe her on one point. She was without question the author and sole inspiration for the Cassiopaeans. Such slime could hardly have come from someone as nice as Fred. And as her life is based on maintaining the next lie, it is not hard to believe that she faked the entire Ouija board experiment simply to get some attention and a Polish mail order bridegroom. The bottom line, the last gasp of New Age channeling turns out to be, on even a cursory examination, merely a fake. A way for a lonely, overweight, sexually frustrated middle-aged woman to get some desperately needed attention. And that just about sums up the whole phenomenon. Now, if you'll excuse me, Queen Victoria is coming over to watch Matrix 2 on my widescreen scrying mirror before it hits the theaters, and later we plan to dial up Laura as the Cassiopeans and tell her the plot. She'll be so thrilled.